synagogue ruler, Jarius must have been wealthy, but his wealth couldn't save his dying daughter. And desperate times call for desperate measures. Make no mistake about it, this was a desperate time. Jairus' daughter is dying. Time is of the essence. If there is any chance for his daughter to live, it's only going to be through the miracle-working power of Jesus the Christ. And it was not easy for Jarius to come to Jesus publicly and ask for his help. The religious leaders who were opposed to Jesus would certainly not approve, nor would some of his colleagues, the other synagogue leaders. The things that Jesus had already done and taught in the synagogues had aroused the anger of the scribes and Pharisees, some of which who were Jairus' friends. But Jairus was a desperate man. He would rather lose his friends and be close to Jesus. So Jarius does what anyone should do when they have their back against life's wall. He goes and finds Jesus. So Jarius leaves his daughter behind in order to seek the master. And when he finds Jesus, the Bible says in verse 23 that he pleads earnestly with him, saying, "My little daughter is dying. Please come and put your hands on her so that she will be healed and live." So Jesus gets up, goes with Jarius, which suggests to me that Jesus is agreeing to do exactly what Jarius asked him to do, and that's heal his daughter. Are you with me? So Jarius is walking with Jesus and the disciples towards Jairus' house. There's a large crowd that they have to go through. Matter of fact, the crowd is so large that the gospel writer Mark describes the crowd as pressed all around him being Jesus. Luke, in his account of this story, describes the crowd as crushing Jesus. That's how many people are in the crowd. When Jesus and his disciples and Jairus are walking towards Jairus' house to heal Jairus' daughter, something unusual happens. Here's where we find a story within a story. At this moment, Jesus is touched by a woman with an issue of blood. Now, the fact that Jesus was touched wasn't what was unusual. Remember, he's walking through a large crowd. For sure, many people must have brushed up against Jesus, but when this woman touched Jesus, this woman of faith, it caused Jesus to lose power. So Jesus stopped his progression to address the woman. Now, many of us are familiar with this story of the unnamed woman with the incurable condition. She had suffered bleeding for 12 years. Her condition made her ritually unclean according to the Levitical laws of the Old Testament. What this meant is she was excluded from normal social relationships. She could not come into contact with anybody because whoever she came into contact with, they would be unclean. She had suffered greatly from various treatments by doctors. She had spent all she owned in a desperate attempt to get well. Nothing helped. In fact, her condition grew worse. But because she had heard about this man named Jesus and his healing power, it aroused her faith. She came up behind Jesus in the crowd and touched his cloak or his clothes, his outer garment. She did this despite her status of being unclean. She did this despite risking public embarrassment. She did this despite her condition being revealed. She kept telling herself that if I could just touch his clothes, she would be healed and she could leave unobserved. The woman touched Jesus' garment and immediately her bleeding stopped. She felt a physical sensation in her body and she was freed from her suffering. This woman who had a hemorrhage that was apparently incurable for 12 years was miraculously and immediately healed by one touch. Now, of course, there are so many lessons and potential sermon angles I can take away from her story. However, my focus is not on the woman tonight. I'm not here to celebrate the woman with the issue of blood. And I know she's a fan favorite. I know we all love to celebrate how a woman had enough courage to go in the synagogue even though she was unclean and unwelcomed. I know we love to celebrate a woman who had enough faith to press close to Jesus even though there were crowds of people surrounding him. I know we love the fact that she had enough faith to preach to herself and tell herself that she doesn't even need him to touch her if